Hello, world, and welcome to the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterland, coming to you from the vacation destination known as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and this is episode 208. The finish line of summer is approaching. Everybody's hurrying to get their final trips in. This week's episode is going to start off with one of the weirdest ways to get on your way with any road trip, as we're going to look back at just what in the world was an Amphicar. We're going to go way, way back in the day and look at the very first sports video games. There are no Madden classics in here. There's going to be a brand new top 5 as we look at the top 5 instrumental songs of all time. And there will be a brand new This Week in History and Time Capsule, looking back at the career of Boston Celtics icon Larry Bird. All of that is coming up right now on episode 208 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Yes, I know I started this off by saying it's the race to the finish line of summer. Now, granted, when this podcast goes up, there is still a month of summer left, a full third of the season. But everyone knows that when you cross Labor Day, it's the unofficial end of summer, so I'm sorry to keep bringing that up. I hope everybody, wherever you are, is having the best day, the best week. I hope summer has treated you well. Hope not too many horrible sunburns. I got one. It wasn't that horrible, but man, my neck was on fire for days. Anyway, we've got an excellent show this week, your weekly dose of Gen X nostalgia. Thank you all for tuning in. Big thank you to my Patreon backers, Lori, Mary Lou, Ashley, Kevin, Marguerite, Neglectoid, Crystal, Matt. Thank you so much for being my biggest supporters. You too can become Patreon members for $5 a month and get access to bonus podcast episodes, access to the remastered Without a Map live streams, one of which went up just this past week. Go and check those out. You can join the free tier. You can also go and buy me a coffee. Links for all of that is in the description of the podcast. But we can get into more housekeeping stuff at the end of the show. Summer is winding to a close, so I'm going to speed up and get us going into the meat of the podcast. You can do a lot of fun road trips in a car. You can do a lot of fun trips on a boat. What if you had something that was the best of both worlds? Well, let us dive into just what in the world was an Amphicar, coming up right now on episode 208 of the In My Footsteps podcast. As I mentioned a few times in the intro to the podcast, it is now the final days of the month of August, going towards the unofficial end of summer. This is the time of year to hurry up and get out there with any road trips you had planned, get them in under the wire. I'm sure the vast majority of you listening have some sort of traditional car or a traditional truck or SUV, something that looks normal. You drive it on the highway. Or if you've got some kind of 4x4, a Jeep like my buddy Steve, you can drive those off-road. I'm almost positive none of you listening have some sort of vehicle you could drive into the water safely. And no, that is not some kind of a dare. But what if I told you for a brief time way back, there was a vehicle that was the best of both worlds, quote unquote best. Land driving, sea driving. It was very real and it was very terrible. So let's go back, won't you please? Join me as we go to the 1960s and the story of just what the hell was the Amphicar.
But where are we getting with this fish-out-of-watery theme of ours? This looks a perfectly normal motor car, but what's its name? The Amphicar. Oh, yes, I begin to see. Just for a start, you make the doors watertight. This is the fish out of water turned inside out. This is the land animal that has taken to life afloat. Two-way traffic on a wavy highway where there's no such thing as a speed cop or a hold-up at the lights.
So as you could tell from my setup, in the annals of automotive history, there are vehicles remembered for speed, or luxury, or some kind of revolutionary technology. And then you've got the Amphicar. The Amphicar was a quirky German-made convertible from the 1960s that could just drive down the road, and then with a few adjustments just drive right into the water and become a boat. It sounds like something that me or one of my classmates would have invented in 3rd grade as far as something we wanted to see in the world. Little did I know when I was in elementary school that real professionals had actually created something like that. The Amphicar Model 770 was the brainchild of Hans Trippel, a German designer fascinated with amphibious vehicles. Trippel had experimented with amphibious designs since the 1930s, but it wasn't until post-World War II, with the boom of the economies, that the concept found commercial viability. The idea of this land-sea vehicle, known as an Amphicar, entered production in 1961, manufactured by the Quant Group in West Germany. This was a conglomerate with ties to BMW. If you're wondering, when I mentioned Model 770, that designation, it wasn't a model number at all. It was a reference to the vehicle's performance. The Amphicar could travel at 7 knots on the water and 70 miles per hour on land. If you were wondering about the speed on the water, I just did a little quick referencing. And an average small fishing boat travels about 9 to 15 knots on average. So this Amphicar was not fast in the water. 70 miles an hour on land is good. But then again, in Germany, they've got their Autobahn highway where most of it doesn't have a speed limit. So you'd be driving this Amphicar with people flying by you. So it wasn't fast, and I don't think that was the point, because the Amphicar offered something that very few vehicles could: a seamless transition between sea and land. It would be perfect for drunks that couldn't be trusted to drive home. Instead of flying off the road into the water, they could now be safe and be picked up miles offshore, passed out in their Amphicar floating. At first glance, the Amphicar looked like a typical small European convertible of the time. Compact, rounded, stylish in a cheerful sort of way. But under the skin, it was packed with specialized features to make water travel possible. The entire body of the vehicle was fully sealed and watertight, functioning like a boat's hull when afloat. Mounted on the rear, the Amphicar had twin propellers that engaged in water, driven by the same engine that powered the wheels. The transition between land and water was like this. The Amphicar was rear-wheel drive on land, but the propellers operated independently once in water. The front wheels acted as rudders for steering on the water. The engine of the Amphicar was a 1,147cc Triumph Herald engine, which produced around 43 horsepower, which was modest even for the time, but it was sufficient for the dual-purpose design. My apologies to any boating enthusiasts. I don't know what that size of the engine with the CCs means. It was just what I found when researching. I'm not going to pretend I know a lot about boats. Anything I know is from my buddy Steve telling me. The doors of the Amphicar had special rubber seals, and a bilge pump was installed to expel any water that made its way inside. Entering the water required a few quick steps. Locking the doors tightly, obviously, engaging the special gear lever for the propellers, and driving straight in. There was literally no need to stop the engine or swap controls, so an Amphicar owner could drive right into a lake and keep going. You imagine being one of the first people to have one of those or to see one of those, and you're at a pond or a lake, and you see someone just drive down the boat ramp and just go in with their car. You're thinking, this is going to be some sort of disaster. You'll be on the news that night talking about what you saw, but nope, it just takes off and goes away, nice and safe. That all sounds good, but in the real world, on the road, the Amphicar handled like a small 1960s sedan, functional if not particularly sporty. On the water, however, its performance was closer to that of a slow-moving dinghy. The 7-knot top speed, it was fine for lakes, rivers, calm coastal waters, but not ideal for rough seas. Don't drive your Amphicar into the ocean. Owners needed to remember that. Despite its boat capabilities, the Amphicar wasn't a substitute for a dedicated watercraft. It sat low in the water and could be swamped by waves if driven recklessly. Still, for the casual cruises and attention-grabbing dockside entrances, it was unmatched. That seems to be as much about having the vehicle as just being able to show it off with people not being able to understand what it is they're seeing. Because there's no doubt that if you were sitting on a dock and you were watching the boats come in and all of a sudden this car pulled up, it would be attention-grabbing.
Here comes a dark cloud on the horizon for anyone who runs a toll bridge for a living. The Amphicar, a new imported model, which is just about at home in the water as it is on the highway.
The Amphicar was targeted primarily at the American market, where post-war prosperity and a growing boating culture made it an attractive novelty. That comes into the issues with the Amphicar with sales. It's a novelty. This is not something that is an excellent boat or an excellent car. It's just good enough of each. The Amphicar was promoted as the sports car that swims and emphasized the versatility for leisure and utility. For me, living on Cape Cod, this seems like the kind of vehicle that would be perfect for being over on Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, an island where you didn't have to drive fast, or being somewhere that has a lot of rivers and ponds. Despite all that hype, and there are some videos you can find on YouTube promoting the Amphicar from the 60s, so getting to see it drive into the water is fascinating. But despite all that hype, sales never reached mass market levels. Between 1961 and 1968, fewer than 4,000 Amphicars were built. U.S. safety and emissions regulations introduced in 1968 made further imports impractical, effectively ending production. This made the Amphicar one of the greatest flops in the history of automotive. Though not quite the same, the Amphicar is on that level with the DeLorean from the 1980s, where the novelty of it quickly wore off, and just seeing how impractical it was really killed the sales. Now, that being said, even though it did not sell well, in fact, it sold terribly, Amphicars have appeared in movies, TV shows. They've appeared in parades as symbols of eccentric fun and retro futurism. There were enthusiast clubs that sprang up decades later, keeping the vehicles operational and organizing swim-ins where dozens of Amphicars entered the water together. It's like one of those rubber duck races, except with these ugly cars. The most famous owner of an Amphicar was then United States President Lyndon B. Johnson. He had the Amphicar, and he would use it to play pranks on guests. He'd be driving them around on his ranch, and then he would suddenly speed down a hill towards the lake, pretending that his brakes had failed, before plunging into the water and just driving off. I couldn't imagine being the first person he showed that to. They're thinking they're going to just crash and have to swim for their lives, and he's like, nope, it's my Amphicar. The Amphicar, like a lot of failed movies, became cult classics. Its engineering later influenced amphibious designs, and it does remain one of the few production amphibious cars ever sold to the public. When it was originally introduced, the Amphicar had a retail value of $2,800, or right around $30,000 when adjusted for inflation to 2025. So today, these surviving Amphicars are highly collectible, with some often fetching prices at well over $70,000 at auctions. So if you have an old house with a huge garage or barn, go out there and see. Maybe there's an Amphicar out there that you can clean up and sell at auction. Today, the Amphicar stands as a delightful piece of 60s innovation. The vehicles are still driven into lakes at car shows and boating events to draw cheers and nostalgic smiles from onlookers. I am shocked that in the 60 years since, there has not been another attempt at some kind of Amphicar. But who knows? Maybe instead of an Amphicar, we're going to get a car that's also a plane. The Aero car. See, I'm inventing it right now. Somebody out there with skill, get on that. This week in history, we are going back 33 years to August 18th, 1992, and the retirement of Boston Celtics legend number 33, Larry Bird. No, I did not hold off on doing this story in This Week in History until it was the 33rd anniversary. When I was doing my research and saw the amount of years it had been, I said, wow, there's a coincidence I cannot pass up. And I couldn't pass up a chance to talk about Larry Bird. I was lucky enough to grow up watching Larry Bird in the 1980s. Known as Larry Legend, Bird is widely regarded as one of the greatest players in NBA history, and his time with the Celtics in the 80s helped define the league's golden era. Longtime Celtics fans know Larry Bird was born in French Lick, Indiana, known as the Hick from French Lick. He grew up in a working-class family, using basketball as an escape and a means to prove himself. He originally enrolled at Indiana University, but ended up at the smaller Indiana State. It was there that he led the Indiana State Sycamores to the 1979 NCAA championship game against Magic Johnson's Michigan State Spartans. That game began the rivalry between Bird and Magic. The next season, Larry Bird entered the NBA on the Boston Celtics. Magic Johnson entered on the Los Angeles Lakers. The rest was kind of history. In the 1978-79 season, the Celtics went 29-53. In Larry Bird's first year in 79-80, they went 61-21. The Celtics had won 2 NBA titles in the 70s, so they weren't a bad team, but Larry Bird instantly made them championship contenders every year he was there. Bird played 13 seasons from 1979 to 1992. He was the face of the Celtics franchise, known for his incredible shooting touch, court vision, clutch performances, relentless competitiveness, the legendary trash talk. He played as hard as he could every night, and that ultimately led to him having to retire relatively early. He was 35 in his last season, which was 1991-92. If he hadn't had such debilitating back injuries, he could have easily played another couple of seasons. In his career, though, he was a 3-time NBA champion in 1981, 84, and 86, a 3-time NBA MVP in 1984, 85, and 86, one of only 3 players to win 3 consecutive MVPs. The other 2 were Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, if you were wondering. Bird was also a 12-time NBA All-Star, with the only year he didn't make the All-Star team being 1988, when he injured his back about 6 games into the season and missed most of the year. I could spend a full podcast episode just talking about great Larry Bird moments, but I'm going to try to condense it to a few. There was the classic NBA Finals against the LA Lakers in 1984, including the Game 7, which I remember fondly because I watched it a few years after I became a sports fan on one of my sick days from school. There was the famous steal in Game 5 of the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals against the Detroit Pistons. It's got one of the most iconic calls from Boston Celtics radio broadcaster Johnny Most.
And now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right at 1 second left. What a play by Bird. Bird stole the inbounding pass.
There was his famous 3-point contest, the All-Star Weekend in 1986, where Larry Bird walked into the locker room and looked at everyone else and said, I want to know which one of you MFs is coming in second place. And then he went and he won the contest without even taking his warm-up jacket off. On March 12, 1985, Bird scored a career-high 60 points against the Atlanta Hawks, with the Hawks players on the bench caught on camera laughing and cheering in disbelief. Above all of that, it's the playing through pain, the working class hero type guy that Larry Bird was. It defined his career, but also shortened it. I vividly remember one of the games in the 91 NBA playoffs against the Indiana Pacers, where he dove for the ball and slammed his head off of the floor, easily getting concussed, but coming back into play later and helping them win. After retiring in 1992, Larry Bird remained with the Celtics as a special assistant, then became the head coach of the Indiana Pacers in 1997, winning Coach of the Year in his first season and leading the Pacers to the 2000 NBA Finals. He later became the only person in NBA history to win an MVP, Coach of the Year, and Executive of the Year. Larry Bird's impact goes way beyond statistics. He was the bridge between old school and new school NBA. He had the legendary rivalry with Magic Johnson that helped to revitalize the NBA. I have really done a speed run through his career. Maybe at some point I will do a deeper dive into the legend of Larry Bird. But right now we celebrate his career, which ended 33 years ago this week in history. Now I'm going to alley-oop you a brand new time capsule. We're going to stick to the same date, August 18th, 1992. Larry Bird is having his retirement press conference. What is going on in the world of pop culture back then? Well, let's find out. The number one song was End of the Road by Boyz II Men. This was off of the soundtrack to the Eddie Murphy movie Boomerang. The song spent 13 weeks at number one. That was the record, but it only stood for a few months when Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You broke it by spending 14 weeks at number one. It is probably Boyz II Men's most known song, although if you said I'll Make Love to You or One Sweet Day with Mariah Carey, I wouldn't disagree with you. The number one movie was Unforgiven, and you could get into the theater with a ticket costing $4.15. This is an action western starring Clint Eastwood, Gene Hackman, Morgan Freeman. Clint Eastwood directed this film, and it won the Academy Award for Best Picture. It's one of those movies that if you enjoy westerns, you will love this film. It's also one that if you don't enjoy westerns, you might still like it because of the stars that are in it. It made $160 million on a budget of about $14 million, and it's 96% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. And obviously you can tell from how I'm describing it that I have seen it and I enjoy it. The number one TV show was 48 Hours. This news show is still going on to this day. Its 39th season is going to debut on September 27th, 2025. It first debuted in 1988 and is almost at 1,000 episodes. That's going to give The Simpsons more ammo to keep going to try to catch 48 Hours. And if you were around back then, August 18th, 1992, maybe you were going to write a school paper about the career of legend Larry Bird. I don't know why you'd write it in the middle of summer, but I need some kind of segue for this product. You're in luck, because if you go to Lechmere, you can get yourself a Packard Bell computer. The Packard Bell Legend PC. Video memory expands to 1 megabyte. You get DOS 5.0, Windows 3.1, you get a mouse, you get a modem, you get game ports. Kind of a primitive computer. The $2,000 price is equal to $4,600 when adjusted for inflation to 2025. It shows how far computers have come in 30 plus years, where you can get a good laptop for $200 now. But that'll wrap up another This Week in History, another time capsule. Sometimes you don't need words to get your point across. And what we're going to do right now is we're going to have a new top 5. We're going to look at the top 5 instrumental songs of all time. Don't worry if you forget the words to these songs, because they don't have any. Over the last few years, one of my new favorite things has been that of down-tempo music. It is hard to explain what it is. It's a mix of a lot of different styles. For those that want a taste of what down-tempo music is, go to Spotify, look up the artist 07, and just listen to a few of their songs. The point is, a lot of down-tempo music has no lyrics to it. It makes it really easy to write to. That's another reason why I really enjoy it. While doing some writing a few weeks ago, it dawned on me about instrumental music. And I started thinking about famous instrumental songs. And so that's what we're going to do here with the top 5 best instrumental songs ever. There's good news and bad news with this. The bad news is because all these songs are copyrighted, I can't really share them or clips of them. Because when this podcast goes up on YouTube, they'll all get copyright strikes and then my channel will just get taken down. But the good news is I already made a Spotify playlist with all these songs and some extras. So this top 5, there's the top 5. There are 5 honorable mentions. The Spotify playlist has 5 extra songs, and the link to it will be in the podcast notes. Because I'm figuring as we dive into this and I name songs and try to describe them, most of you are going to be like, wait a minute, I don't understand. I need to hear it. I'll do my best here to paint a picture of what these songs are. So with the top 5s, they are in no particular order. The honorable mentions will get a bit of a speed run through. So let's dive in. Honorable mentions for best instrumental songs include Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs. This is from 1962 and has been in a lot of movies, including Happy Gilmore, The Sandlot, American Graffiti, and a lot more. Another honorable mention is The Theme from a Summer Place by Percy Faith. It's called The Theme from a Summer Place because it's in the movie A Summer Place, which came out in 1959. Another honorable mention is Classical Gas by Mason Williams. This song is from 1968. I remember it being in a Simpsons episode, Last Exit to Springfield, which is from season 4. Another honorable mention is Tequila by the Champs. The song is from 1958. It was featured in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and yes, I know it has the word tequila in it, but when doing research for best instrumental songs, this kept coming up, so I'm like, all right, well, I can't really get all the blame. And the final honorable mention is Sleepwalk by Santo and Johnny. This song is from 1959. I remember it from the 1987 film La Bamba at the end. But those are the honorable mentions. Do you know any of those songs based on how I described them? I figured giving you a movie or TV show where you can hear them might make them ring a bell without me playing clips to get copyright strikes. But let's move into the actual top 5 best instrumental songs, in my opinion. And we're going to start with number 1, Eruption by Van Halen. This is by Van Halen, but more specifically Eddie Van Halen. This is off of the band's 1978 self-titled debut album, and it immediately showcases just the insane talent of Eddie Van Halen. The song is only 1:42 in length, but in that time, it's like Eddie Van Halen plays about 4 minutes worth of music that he crams down. And I will say, anybody out there who's like, he's only good on electric guitar, check out the song Spanish Fly from Van Halen 2 in 1979. It's another instrumental song, but it is Eddie Van Halen on acoustic guitar. It's about 1 minute long and will probably shut up a lot of critics who think Eddie Van Halen was only good on electric guitar. Number 2 is Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. This is a jazz song. We go back to 1959. It is from the album Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet. Also, I'd like you to try to say Brubeck 5 times fast. I've had to edit out a lot of screw-ups so far. When this song was first released, it was kind of a sleeper hit, kind of below the radar, but eventually went on to become the highest-selling jazz single of all time. Ironically, this song also can be referred to The Simpsons. In the season 18 episode, Jazzy and the Pussycats, where Bart finds out he's a drummer, he sits in and plays this song with a band. This is one of those songs, like back in the Time Capsule segment where I said if you like Westerns, you'll love Unforgiven. If you don't like them, you might still like Unforgiven. This is kind of the same, where if you like jazz, you'll love this song. If you don't like jazz and listen to it, you still might like it. That's just my opinion. Number 3 is Gonna Fly Now by Bill Conti. We all know this as the Rocky theme from 1976. I also can see a few of you shaking your heads because there are a few lyrics to it. But really, are you going to go to a party and put this on karaoke? Stand there and jog in place through the song and then just scream, "Gonna fly now"? No, you're not going to do it. This song was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It lost to Evergreen from the movie A Star Is Born. Even if you don't know the name of this song, you know the song. You can hear the music. You don't have to have watched any of the Rocky movies. It's a staple of sporting events, although I don't know as much today because the song is almost 50 years old, but it still makes for a great workout song even all these years later. Number 4 is Serious by the Alan Parsons Project. All I need to say about this song is it was the introduction song for the famed Chicago Bulls during their big run as a dynasty in the NBA. The song itself is from the album Eye in the Sky from 1982 by the Alan Parsons Project. The official version is 1 minute 48 seconds. I was able to find the extended version of this song, which is over 4.5 minutes long and includes guitars. It's another one that, like I said, a staple of sporting events. It is also a great workout song, especially the extended version that really gets rockin'. And if you were wondering, I couldn't find any connection between the Sirius song and the Sirius satellite company, which is now Sirius XM. Bet you didn't expect me to say Sirius so many times. And finally, number 5 on the list of best instrumental songs is Jessica by the Allman Brothers Band. This song is from 1973. It's off of the album Brothers and Sisters. It is an excellent travel road trip song. When you hear it, you can just picture being on the open highway. The album version of the song is 7.5 minutes long, making it easy to get lost in if you're driving, if you're just enjoying time outside. Slightly younger listeners might remember this song being used for the local on the 8s on the Weather Channel in the 2000s. You'd have that song playing, and in the background, currently in your area, 55 degrees. Like I said, I made a Spotify playlist with all these songs plus some extra ones that didn't make the cut. The whole playlist is an hour long, so turn it on and go for a drive or a walk and just get lost in some of the best instrumental songs ever. We go from best instrumental songs to the original days of sports video games. I'm not saying any of these were the best or the worst. They were just the first, and we're going to talk about them now. Video games have evolved so much over the last 50 years. Better graphics, better sound, better stories, more immersive playing modes. It all had to start somewhere. Younger listeners, you didn't just wake up and have the PS5 or Xbox Series X or Nintendo Switch 2. In fact, for this segment, we're going back even before Nintendo. We're going to look at the very first sports video games. I got this idea from a video I watched on YouTube that featured the original pro wrestling video games, all from the mid-1980s, late 80s. And it gave me the idea about the original sports games in general. What I did for this segment was I made the cutoff 1985. I wanted it to be before the Nintendo Entertainment System debuted in the United States. Because if we go with the original Nintendo, there are so many iconic video games that were on that system. Tecmo Bowl, Blades of Steel, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out, RBI Baseball. I didn't want this segment to be all just you out there saying, yeah, I already knew about this game. If you really want to get technical, the very first sports video game was called Tennis for Two, and it came out way back in 1958. It was created by a man named William Higginbotham, and you played it on something called an oscilloscope. It looks like an old radar. So yes, technically that's the first one. Sports video games, I guess as we now know them, got their start in the early 1970s. Technology was definitely primitive by today's standards. developers were experimenting with how to replicate athletic competition on screens with very limited graphics. The spark that lit the flame of sports video games was Pong. So 1972, Pong came out, created by Atari. If you're younger and you've never played Pong, you will be extremely disappointed. The game was tennis, just like Tennis for Two. The paddles were just white rectangles with a ball that was a small square pixel. But it became a phenomenon in video game arcades. Anyone could play it. So big was Pong that in 1975, Sears was selling a home version of Pong. It was literally a video game console that only played Pong, and it cost $98.95. That's the equivalent of $594 when adjusted for inflation to 2025 just to play Pong at home. Atari followed up Pong with a game called Gotcha in 1973. Now, this wasn't traditional sports. It was more of a maze game or kind of like playing tag. Although it was notable and controversial for the weird joystick, which instead of being a normal stick were two pink balls that you squeezed. That was quickly changed. In 1976, a company named Midway made a basketball game, literally called basketball. Black and white graphics, one-on-one play. You could move your little figure to jump and block shots, so it was a big deal at the time. This paved the way for Atari's basketball in 1978. This was an arcade game that was one of the first to simulate a team sport with player movement on a court. Two stick figures dribbled and shot at a hoop. The simple joystick allowed more freedom than Pong's vertical rectangle movements. And although it's primitive, it marked a step toward representing real sports with their rules and environments. You're going to be hearing a lot of Atari mentioned on this segment. They were basically the kings of video games up until the early 1980s. They created a game in 1978 called Tournament Table. What it was, they took the Pong format with the rectangles and the little ball going across, and instead of it being tennis, they made it also hockey, handball, even volleyball. Back then they could get away with it because video games were new. But could you imagine today having one video game, the same exact setup, but 4 different versions of it that are the same thing? Just like a different character as the main one. We stick with Atari and we stick with the 70s with 1979's football. This was a standout at arcades with a unique trackball control system to simulate running. Players would roll the trackball to move their on-screen football players, adding a physical element that made the game feel more like a sport itself. You had plays you could actually select from a basic menu. Obviously nothing like Tecmo Bowl or later Madden, but still, it started to give you strategy. Also in 1979, Intellivision released their first baseball game. You could control pitching and batting, and with higher resolution, it looked better than things that Atari 2600 was putting out. As the 70s turned to the 80s, you still had the huge popularity of arcades, but you started to get the rising world of home consoles. The Atari VCS, the video console system, 2600, 5200 later. Intellivision, ColecoVision. You got games like Activision's Boxing, which came out in 1980 for the Atari 2600. It was a top-down view of two boxers trying to land punches on each other, more like Rock'em Sock'em Robots. It wasn't just for home consoles, though. Home computers, which were becoming more affordable in the early 1980s, also had their share of video games, sports games. In 1982, the game One-on-One Dr. J versus Larry Bird was released for the Apple II, Commodore 64, and Atari 8-bit systems. This was one of the first sports games to use real athletes in it. Not just names and numbers of just fictional people, but Julius Erving and Larry Bird. It also allowed you slam dunks and blocks and backboard shattering moments. It doesn't sound like much, but considering that just 10 years earlier, all you had was 2 rectangles and a ball, and that was considered the height of sports video games, it was a huge achievement. Also in 1982, you had the highly popular pole position game. It's an auto racing game. This was from Namco. It introduced realistic track layouts, time-based qualification laps. I remember this game for Atari. Racing games, I think you don't need to do much to make them engaging. Even back in the early 80s, you're just driving a car round and round and round. Besides making the graphics look better, it's pretty much the same. In 1983, Intellivision released their World Series baseball, improving on their 1979 baseball game. This was considered revolutionary for the time. Multiple camera angles, which was a first in sports gaming. A more realistic baseball diamond view. The Japanese company Taito released the game Alpine Ski, which came out in Japan in 1981 but made it to America in 1983. It had downhill racing, slaloms, jumps. It made it where you needed quick reflexes to dodge hazards like trees and rocks. It had the scrolling mountain background. As we get into 1984 and 85, it's technically before the Nintendo was widely available in the United States, but it was already in existence in Japan. So you see games like Konami's Track and Field from 1983, which would later become well-known and popular for the original NES. You also had the Summer Games by a company called Epyx, E-P-Y-X. It was an arcade game, but it also was released for Atari and Apple II. It was based on the 1984 Summer Olympics. Epyx released a lot of these types of games, Olympic type ones with lots of different games, but they were so dependent on the Commodore 64 for the sales of the games that when Commodore went down in the late 80s, Epyx went with them, and they filed for bankruptcy in 1988. And the last one as far as games go, 1985, Sega's earliest sports entries were Great Soccer and Great Baseball. This had scrolling fields and more fluid animation. It was more, these games, Great Soccer, Great Baseball, were bridging the gap between arcade games, which were so amazing, and then the home console where they couldn't handle the same memory, graphics, etc. If you don't know what I mean, look at the difference between Pac-Man the arcade game and Pac-Man for Atari, and that'll tell you all you need to know. These original sports games were highly popular and highly unique. Back then in the 70s, early 80s, there was very simple play because the controllers were limited buttons, a joystick. It made the games more accessible to everyone. If I was to pick up a PS5 and try to play some kind of sports game, there are so many things I'd have to learn. I'm not saying I'd rather play Pong than the current version of Madden. I'm just saying one is far easier. The innovative hardware with a lot of these games made them unique. I've mentioned the trackballs, paddles. You could have multiple controllers when you started to get the home consoles. That sense of competition was a big part of it. Playing your friends in Pong or baseball or boxing. Looking back on those games in the 70s, early 80s, from now, they're all primitive. A lot of younger people would get bored with them probably really quick after the first kind of ironic playing of a game. You'd probably get bored of them. But back then, growing up, they were everything. I remember playing Atari. I remember going to the video arcade. I love the convenience of games now. You can go to retrogames.cz and play so many of those old 80s, 70s games. But part of me at my age now wishes I could go back to before I knew of all these great games now and experience Pong for the first time or Atari football or basketball. Do you remember any of those old original sports video games? Were there any I missed? Like I said, I tried to keep the cutoff to when the original NES came out in the United States. And if you're jonesing to play Pong, There is a website, ponggame.org, where you can play it. I will link it in the podcast description for you. But until next week, that's going to wrap up episode 208 of the In My Footsteps podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed your weekly dose of Gen X nostalgia. Thank you for making it to the end. Thank you for dealing with me. I've had a pretty raging headache throughout this morning as I'm recording the podcast. I didn't want to say that at the top of the show because I didn't want to give myself an excuse to have less enthusiasm. I put everything I can into this show every week, and I think I did a pretty good job. If you enjoyed the show, if you enjoy my content, podcast, books, blogs, YouTube videos, all that, there are many ways you can support me. You can become a Patreon subscriber for $5 a month. You can join the free tier and sample some things. You can buy me a coffee. Or if that's not possible, becoming a paying subscriber, you can share my work. I promote myself as much as possible, but it means as much or more when people who aren't me share my work and say, look, check this guy out. He's pretty good. Next week is episode 209, the last episode before Labor Day. And oh boy, is it loaded with fun stuff. We are going to do a deep dive into the life and times of Pee Wee Herman, a.k.a. Paul Reubens. We're going to look at some of the most popular board games of the 1960s. I'm going to give you a crash course with the new top 5 as we look at short-lived video game consoles. And This Week in History is going to be crazy as we look way back at something called the Great Moon Hoax, which happened almost 200 years ago. No spoilers given, but you will want to tune in for that. All that is coming up next week on episode 209 of the In My Footsteps podcast. September is going to be a giant month for the show. I've got loads of stuff. The shows are all planned out. I'm very excited. Every week's going to be a good show, but then again, I would say that, wouldn't I? If you ever hear me say, coming up next week is, the show's all right, then you know that it's gone off the rails. Happy belated birthday last week to one of my oldest and dearest friends, Hassan. We've been friends over 35 years. He was down last week. We went with his son mini golfing. His son beat us, of course. Then we ate ice cream to wash away our tears of having a 9-year-old defeat us. All you need to know about the kind of man Hassan is that every time he comes down to Cape Cod to visit, he makes it a point to visit my mother as well as me because of the important impact she made on his life. I am lucky that I have several really good friends that I know would do the same thing. But it's really something special when one of your friends coming down to visit their old, hometown wants to see your mother. So happy belated birthday, Hassan. I am still working on finding the Walkman MP3 connection to my laptop so I can digitize our very first radio program that we did in 1990. Yes, my adventures in podcasting today stem back to audio cassettes that Hassan and I made in 1990. It included such classics as A Day in Life at School when I was in 7th grade, many commercials, and 13-year-old sense of humor, things that don't age well, that are embarrassing. So no, I won't be sharing any clips. Well, I shouldn't say never. Find me all over social media, subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow my Facebook fan page. I'm on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky. Visit my homepage, ChristopherSetterland.com. Links to all 9 of my books with the plan for the 10th book. Sometime soon, I mentioned I have to buy the ISBN number so I can sell it online. I should, within the next week or two, have some big news about my next film project with my friend producer Frank Durant. I've kept it very tight-lipped because I'm waiting for official confirmation to kind of launch what we've got going on. Just because I don't always mention these other projects doesn't mean they're not going on. I just sometimes feel like I'm teasing you a lot, so I try to stop that. I keep saying the unofficial end of summer is coming. That's mostly meant to get you out there to enjoy it. Enjoy the warm weather. Enjoy the long days. Because before you know it, sunset will be at 4:30. It'll be 25 degrees. Now, obviously, I love fall, so I'm not going to complain too much. Well, I will when it happens, but I won't complain now. But whatever you do, have the best day, the best week possible. I'll be back next week for episode 209. But until then, remember, in this life, don't walk in anyone else's footsteps. Create your own path and enjoy every moment you can on this journey we call life, because you never know what tomorrow brings. This has been the In My Footsteps podcast. I am Christopher Setterlin. You already knew that. And I'll talk to you all again soon.